Welcome to the podcast. There's a really interesting chapter in this book. By the way, I don't have a manuscript for this episode. I just thought I would shoot it real time and then do a little video editing. Hopefully I'll put up some pictures of some cathedrals or something. But in about the middle of Victor Hugo's Hunchback of Notre Dame, which would have been written around 1850. I mean, give or take. I'm not sure exactly. Sorry, let me see if I can get the date on this for you. 1800, doesn't say. Okay, so middle of the 19th century. Of course, he goes into a very long descriptions about the cathedral itself, right? Which you'll remember seeing pictures of on fire last year when it burned down, or 2 years ago, or whenever that was. And there's a really interesting chapter here that I want you guys to pay attention to. It's called "This Will Kill That." Okay, this will kill that. And I'll just say that this is books and the printing press, and that is architecture and the cathedral. So the argument in this chapter that he makes in his very sort of stylized, poetic way is that the printing press essentially made the very ornate architecture of the medieval Gothic cathedrals sort of, at the very least, financially inexpedient and basically unnecessary. So I'm going to read some of this to you, and then we can talk about why I think you can almost just read it as an extract from this book. Although, by the way, the book's really good if you've never read Hunchback of Notre Dame. But here's how it starts. So in the chapter before this, there was a long dialogue between a bishop and somebody else about the printing press and Bibles or something like that. And so that's where we pick up in this chapter. It says, "Our readers must excuse us if we stop a moment to investigate the enigmatic words of the archdeacon. This will kill that. The book will kill the edifice." In our opinion, the thought had two meanings. First of all, it was the great view of a priest. It was the fear of an ecclesiastic before a new force, the printing press. It was the frightened yet dazzled man of the sanctuary confronting the illuminating Gutenberg press. It was the pulpit and the manuscript, the spoken word and the written word, alarmed because of the printed word. Something like a sparrow frozen at the sight of a legion of angels spreading their 6 million wings. It was the cry of the prophet who already hears the rumbling of emancipated humanity, who sees in the distant future intelligence sapping faith, opinion dethroning belief, the world shaking the foundations of Rome. It was the prognostication of a philosopher who sees human thought volatilized by the press, evaporating from the theocratic vessel. It was the terror of a soldier who examines the steel battering ram and says, "The tower will crumble." It signified that one great power was following upon the heels of another great power. It meant the printing press will destroy the church. What a paragraph, right? This is the kind of thing that signals epochal shifts, and that's what got me to thinking about it today. It seems to me like there is some major thing happening, right? It almost feels like we're approaching a new axial age, as I've said before. I don't like to think that, because I like to think that somehow Christ will return and set all this straight. But there was the supersession of the old law by the new law, and I don't know. Who knows, right? God works in mysterious ways. So anyway, I thought this would interest you guys on the question, if nothing else, of printing destroying architecture. One of the points Hugo makes is that really there has not been great cathedral architecture since the advent of the printing press. And I think he's kind of a genius for seeing that that our highest thoughts used to be embodied in stone, in architecture, and now, this story is set in the 1490s or something, and now we're going to do it in another way. It reminds me also of course, of the intrusion of the internet, right, into the world. Like, it's no one seems to have understood what was coming, but like, doesn't it feel like we're kind of, well, again, like almost like we're superseding the book as the dominant technology for expression, something like that. So here, I'm going to read more from the middle of this. He says, if we summarize what we have here very sketchily pointed out, disregarding 1,000 detailed proofs and objections, we are led to conclude that up to the 15th century, architecture was the chief recorder for the human race. During this interval of time, every thought, no matter how complicated, was embodied in some structure. Every idea that rose from the people, every religious law, had its counterpart in monuments. Finally, every important thought of the human race was recorded in stone. And why? Because every thought, be it religious or philosophic, wants to be perpetuated. Because an idea which has motivated one generation wants to motivate another and to leave its trace. But how precarious is the immortality of the manuscript? How far more solid, lasting, and resistant is the edifice, the book in stone? To destroy the written word, you need only a torch and a Turk. To demolish the constructed word, you need a social revolution or an earthquake. Barbarism swept over the Colosseum, a deluge, perhaps, over the pyramids. In the 15th century, everything changed. Obviously you get the idea, right? It's easier to burn books or to bury them or to, hide in them the crucial ideas. Like, I have been thinking lately about how part of my life is this feeling of betrayal, that people somewhere along the line in my family tree, and of course in the domain of education, let's say, and the clerisy and stuff, people weren't there. There are things that people don't say because I guess they became impolite or uncouth or whatever, that I needed to know. I needed to know that, at the very least, that they were said in past times. You know what I mean? That kind of a thing. And I suspect that part of the reason that some of these people let themselves off the hook for that stuff was that these things are sort of buried there, kind of, on page 227 in a lot of the classic books. And so my parents, my teachers, maybe they thought well, we don't have to say these things, but we'll let these young people find out for themselves. But you can't say that and then give us Nintendos and Little League and membership at the country club golf course and bicycles, and it's there's too many things to do. I'm not going to read my John Stuart Mill to understand what everybody has always thought and the arguments that have always been predominant, right? And so instead, I just kind of came online with the internet in 1993, and that's a whole other kind of learning. Continuing to read Hugo. Human intelligence discovered a way of perpetuating itself, one not only more durable and more resistant than architecture, but also simpler and easier. Architecture was dethroned. The stone letters of Orpheus gave way to the lead letters of Gutenberg. The book will kill the edifice. The invention of printing was the greatest event in history. It was the parent revolution. It was the fundamental change in mankind's mode of expression. It was human thought doffing one garment to clothe itself in another. It was the complete and definitive sloughing off of the skin of a serpent, which, since the time of Adam, has symbolized intelligence. Okay, well, I hope you're catching the idea here. I mean, it is really an interesting idea to me, and it does seem like there was this just huge proliferation of writing, of books, of publishing, of reading and literacy following this kind of there must have been a short overlap period, right, when they were still building the cathedrals, and then the printing press came online, and all of a sudden, it's not, Kant was not or Hume or Montesquieu or whatever. These guys were not architects because it didn't feel like that was the highest thing you could do. It felt like the highest thing you could do now was write a book. Is it any wonder that human intelligence quitted architecture for printing? If you can abruptly cut off the pristine bed of a river by means of a canal dug upstream from it, the river will abandon its bed. Then observe, too, he says, how, after the discovery of printing, architecture gradually became dry, withered, naked. How the spring visibly sank, sap ceased to rise, the thought of the times and of the people deserted it. This cooling off is hardly perceptible in the 15th century. The press is still too feeble. And what little it does abstract from all-powerful architecture is but the superabundance of its strength. But in the 16th century, the sickness is quite patent. Already architecture is no longer the essential expression of society. It miserably degenerates into classic art. From being Gallic, European, indigenous, it becomes Greek and Roman. From the genuine and modern, it becomes pseudo-antique. It is this decadence that we call the Renaissance. A magnificent decadence, we might add, for the old Gothic genius, that sun which is now setting behind the gigantic printing press of Mayence, for a little while still sends its last rays over this hybrid mass of Latin arches and Corinthian colonnades. It is to this setting sun that we look for a new dawn. The cathedral, like as an object, here I'm speaking kind of all of them, is worth making a pilgrimage to go see, right? Like if you've never been to Europe to see the old cathedrals, like it would be great if you could make that trip just to see the Florence Cathedral or, whatever. It's like I think they elevate the imagination. And then if you find one of these Gothic cathedrals and you look at the exterior and you see that, again, yes, they are trying to give expression, even in the stained glass windows, right? You have the ideas presented in this new way. I remember, they used to build in the Stations of the Cross in a lot of Catholic churches. And the Stations of the Cross are interesting because they're not strictly biblical, I don't think. There are parts of the Stations of the Cross that are presumably oral tradition or just Roman Catholic tradition. And they embody these often in, sculptures on the walls or in stained glass windows or whatever. And in this sense, it gives you this total immersive experience in, metaphysical education, right? Whereas, which I'm not saying it's better necessarily, but it's different than reading a book. In a book, it's you and the book. It feels more like it all happens in your head. There isn't an exterior thing that's manifest, right? So it's harder for two people. That's part of the difficulty of this podcast, actually, is I wish I could go, look, you guys, get the Signet Classic version of Victor Hugo's Hunchback of Notre Dame so that you can look on page 184 with me at this exact part so that we can reach agreement about a thing. But that's harder to do, right? You don't have this book. You're not going to order it. Even if you did, this video isn't live. And so we have a harder time agreeing on like that, okay? Whereas if we're in a church on Sunday and we see the light stream in through the red and purple stained glass window that shows, what's her name? It's not Monica, but something like that, wiping Jesus's face as he's carrying the cross. Like, we can't disagree that that's there, right? Like, and now we both kind of are aware of that. Let me just read a couple more sections I've got underlined in this chapter. So before the printing press, the Reformation would have been but a schism. Printing made it a revolution. Take away the press, and heresy is paralyzed. Be it fatal or providential, Gutenberg is the precursor of Luther. Yeah, actually, listen to this next part too, because it is interesting. I mean, Hugo almost takes a stand here. He says, however, when the sun of the Middle Ages has completely set, when the light of the Gothic genius has gone out forever, over the horizon of architecture too becomes more and more pale, colorless, and lifeless. The printed book, that gnawing worm in the structure, sucks its blood and eventually devours it. It droops, withers, wastes away before your very eye. It becomes shabby, poor, of no account. It no longer expresses anything, not even the art of another time. So, I mean, Hugo seems to argue here that, like, the introduction of a new and preferred, because what, more, again, like, practical, more expedient, cheaper way of embodying ideas, because of that, the old mode, the old genre, the whole old medium withers on the vine, right? Like, we can't build cathedrals the way we used to because we have books now, is the idea. And books, I mean, a book, it's amazing, but like, it's true. I mean, really, if you read Les Miserables, for example, 1,400 pages or something, it's up there with walking into a cathedral. I mean, I guess I would argue that with people. Maybe it's not true for everyone. Maybe it takes a while to like acclimate yourself to be a good reader. But if you become a good reader, to read certain books is the closest you can get to what would be like a modern experience akin to walking into a cathedral. I mean, I've sometimes asked, like, you know, I've heard this interesting argument that like it's like, where are the prophets? Like, why aren't we getting healers anymore? Well, there's an argument to be made that like the great artists and architects of the Christian history were the inheritors of the prophetic tradition, that they were the ones that the Holy Spirit was moving in the right way somehow. But I mean, and that's great, but then the problem now is like, well, what happens when, you know, first of all, we can, like, is there such a thing as that in books? Like, was Victor Hugo a kind of saint or a prophet or a Holy Spirit activated artist, right? And now the question is, what if it's true that books themselves, as sort of the form that followed the cathedral, are becoming outmoded, and we're moving into, again, a new medium, which would be, I don't know, something like probably video and imagery, you could argue TV and movies and all that kind of stuff, but like the internet maybe as the next sort of push into, new territory or something. So he says here, meanwhile, what of printing? All the life ebbing away from architecture was being absorbed by printing. As architecture waned, printing waxed. The store of strength spent hitherto by the human mind on buildings is now spent upon books. And doesn't it feel like this is where we are again, moving now away from books and into sort of the, again, brave new world, this time of the internet or something like that. Now, what's interesting in my hope here is that there was some continuity, right? It was done in a different mode, but the cathedral was Christian, and then there were Christian books. So you can drag whatever it is that you think is most important from one epoch into another, but you have to do it very consciously, okay? So if there are things we want to take from this era into the next, put them on the ark. Like, figure out a way to make a YouTube channel where you take all the things that you thought were most precious about the era of the book and put them into video form. Like, that's the best hope that we have at this point, I suppose, okay? That's what we're trying to do here at the God Word Podcast. Keep reading from Victor Hugo. The great poem, the great structure. Actually, let me back up 2 or 3 sentences, sorry. A book is so quickly made, costs so little, and can go so far. Is it any wonder that all human thought should use this conveyance? This is not to say that some architect will not make again here or there a beautiful monument, some isolated masterpiece. We shall have again from time to time during the reign of printing an obelisk constructed, say by an entire army out of melted cannons, as during the reign of architecture we had the Iliads, the Romanceros, the Mahabharatas, and the what's that one that they always, the Nibelungen, the Nibelungen, you know, isn't that Nordic thing or whatever? Built by whole nations with the welded fragments of 1,000 rhapsodies. The great good fortune of having an architect of genius may befall the 20th century, like a Dante in the 13th. But architecture will never be the social, collective, dominant art it was. The great poem, the great structure, the great masterwork of humanity will never again be built. It will be printed. You catch this, right? This will kill that. Are we entering the new era? There's a book, I mean, this is what I do. I'm stuck in the old era, right? There's a book by Neil Stevenson that I mentioned sometimes called, Seven Eves? Or, no, Anathema, about like a 500 years or 1,000 years from now future where only about 10% of humankind still reads. The rest of them are on bread and circuses, watching things on screens and so on. But there are these like monastic communities of readers trying to hold on to the old technology. And it's a fun premise because although it's set 1,000 years in the future, it feels like it's now, to be honest, right? Thus, to recapitulate briefly, the human race has 2 books, 2 registers, 2 testaments, architecture and printing, the stone Bible and the paper Bible. Unquestionably, when one examines these 2 books, so widely read through the centuries, it is permissible to regret the visible majesty of the granite writing, those gigantic alphabets and colonnades, porches and obelisks, those kinds of human mountains which cover the world and the past, from the pyramids to the church steeple, from Cheops to Strasbourg. One must read the past in these marble pages. One must admire and leaf through over and over again the book written by architecture. But one must not deny the grandeur of the edifice which printing has raised in its turn. Almost done here. At the end of, I'm going to read the last page or so, or like it's not even a page, but hang on here. Well, okay, I'll finish with this because I don't have much more to say about this one. I think this will be like, is this a shortish episode? Yeah, this will be fine. Except this is only a 15-page chapter in this, and it's available online, and you should probably read it. It's really interesting if this kind of thing is interesting to you. Quote, "The edifice is colossal. I cannot name the statistician who calculated that by piling one upon the other all the volumes issuing from the press since Gutenberg, one would fill the space between the earth and the moon. But it is not that kind of greatness of which we wish to speak. Nevertheless, if we try to form a collective picture of the combined results of printing down to modern times, does not this total picture seem to us like an immense structure, having the whole world for its foundation, a building upon which humanity has worked without cease and whose monstrous head is lost in the impenetrable mist of the future? This printed tower is the swarming ant-hill of intelligences. It is the beehive where all the imaginations, those golden bees, arrive with their honey. The building has 1,000 stories. Here and there, opening up on its ramps, can be seen the mysterious caverns of science which intersect in its bowels. Everywhere on its surface, art luxuriously exhibits its arabesques, its rose windows, and its lacework. There, every individual work, however capricious or isolated it may seem, has its place and its projection. The result of the ensemble is harmony. From Shakespeare's cathedral to Byron's mosque, 1,000 bell towers throng together pell-mell in this metropolis of universal thought. At its base, there have been recast several ancient titles of humanity which architecture had not registered. To the left of the entrance, there has been attached the old white marble bas-relief of Homer. To the right, the polyglot Bible raises its 7 heads. The Hydra of the Romancero stands forth further on, as well as several other hybrid forms, the Veda and the Nibelungen. However, the prodigious building remains forever incomplete. The press, that giant engine, incessantly gorging all the intellectual sap of society, incessantly vomits new material for its work. The entire human race is its scaffolding. Every mind is its mason. Even the humblest may block a hole or lay a stone. Every day a new tier is raised. Besides the original and individual contributions of separate writers, there were collective donations. The 18th century contributed the encyclopedia. The Revolution, the Monitor. Certainly, these two are structures, growing and piling themselves up in endless spirals. Here, too, there is a confusion of languages, untiring labor, incessant activity, a furious competition of all humanity, a promised refuge for the intelligence against another deluge, against another submersion by the barbarians. It is the second Tower of Babel of the human race. Isn't that awesome? What an ending sentence there. So what is? Did you catch all that? What is the second Tower of Babel for the human race? Books. And what happens to the Tower of Babel? It collapses under its own weight. It gets too high into the sky, the foundation isn't strong enough, and so on. I do feel like we're approaching that. I say that as a person who has read, 400 or 500 books. I've done my best to understand them. I feel like I have just scratched the surface, and there are so many things that I don't understand. Like, it's just like almost all of history is a dark black spot to me. And I say that as a person who can give you like a soaring, overarching narrative about history, but if you asked me the details, you would catch me with my pants down. It's like I don't actually know. Like I kind of can go like, oh, and then came Charles Martel, and the barbarians were rebelled, and then But it's like, ask me anything specific about why that happened then, and I go, I don't know. I just read it on Wikipedia, right? So part of this is to think about like, okay, the Library of Alexandria is on fire again. So to speak, symbolically, the cathedral is coming down. What can we preserve, and how is it going to make it into a form that is digestible in the new age? Like, this is one of the things, like I did my nostalgia video, right? And I was thinking like, oh, the time was better back then or whatever, and it's like, I understand it's a depressor, it's sad, it's a kind of melancholy video, the nostalgia video. It would be maybe more fun to pump out like future wave, vapor wave, neo-Renaissance energy. But I don't find that medium yet to be capable of preserving some of the things that I think really need to be preserved. I mean, it's got a good beat, but who cares, right? Like, if I can't squeeze into it an idea like this, then it's not really for me, which maybe just leaves me in, like an antiquated person, I guess, which is kind of it sucks. I mean, it's not my favorite thing. but no one is yet offering like a new medium that can replace the cathedral, which was replaced by the book, and that like is grand enough, right, to like incorporate, to embody our highest thinking about things like God. I don't see that happening in vaporwave 3-minute, like, well, I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong. I saw King Kush's videos the other day. They were very funny, and maybe you can like condense and sort of extract the essence, and by a certain editing and video, like side by side, put things adjacent that otherwise wouldn't be, and you can. I suppose a real artist could make a product that would sort of begin to encapsulate our highest thoughts and still be viewable. Like one of the things that I notice in my videos, if I look at my statistics, is that it starts high, the viewership, right? 100% of people click watch and then they start, but then it just it trickles off. Like by this point in the video, I've lost 60 or 70% of my normal viewership. And I guess, I don't know, I guess that's because like listening to a guy talk is no longer the right medium. But I don't know how to squeeze the essence of the West into your Instagram feeds. You know what I mean? So that's the idea with the Victor Hugo book. Thanks for listening. This was kind of a special episode, but I think I'll put it in there as a real episode. And then I'm looking forward to the next few episodes. I've got to do one I want to do on Melville's Bartleby the Scrivener, because I'm feeling this personally, but also I'm seeing a lot of people say in public forums that like work has become dehumanizing again, and it makes it feel meaningless, and sitting in a cubicle is like anti-human, or certainly anti-masculine or something like that. So I want to talk about Bartleby. I've also got to do Polybius. I want to talk about the war elephants and Carthage. I got to try to... I read Aeschylus's Orestia last month. I might have to read it again, or listen to the Hubert Dreyfus lectures on it again or something, because I got it, but I didn't quite get get it yet, like in the same way that I get the Odyssey or something. So, and maybe sometimes that comes from trying to teach it. So maybe I'll just like put the Aeschylus video together, and like you guys can help me learn it with the comments. So far on this, I've mostly been teaching stuff I feel pretty comfortable with. Sometimes you got to teach stuff that you've only just barely read once or twice. So that's coming too. And then if you have other suggestions in the comments section, do that. I also have like kind of longer term ideas for the podcast. I might like to work back towards something like a Sunday Bible chat, like a real time, thing. I think my ideal would be to like do this with one person basically, and just really drill down. Like I've been watching Justin Murphy's Chat for God show, and I like the format. It's not exactly my favorite taste in terms of their like view on things or their content, but like the format's what matters, right? It's going to be him and Marin talking about the same, the things week after week. And then if you're a regular viewer, you start to know both of them, their positions, and then like week 7 or 10 or 15 of doing that, that's where like you can get down to the level where something interesting might happen, because that's where, well, we know each other superficially, but like, what if in week 15 we discover that we have different assumptions about the meaning of like, I don't know, the Jesus and the adulterous woman at the beginning of John 8, and it's like, well, then we don't agree about much, do we? Right? And like that's where a really interesting, like, view, for me at least, dynamic might emerge that seems like would interest viewers. I don't know. So if you have other ideas, let me know. But I'll keep cranking out the regular content. We'll keep doing the Patreon streams. Man, Friday's secret stream for patrons only was absolutely lit this time, in my mind. There was a lot of solid content. We talked about like the nature of money. And we went for about 2.5 hours, and I like almost got there a couple of times. You know what I mean by that? Like for me, and it takes at least 2 hours of like talking to get me into territory where I might like learn something from somebody, because you got to build up the trust. You got to understand where they're coming from. You got to do some definitions. And then it's like, oh, are you saying that you think like even gold isn't real, man? And then it's like, yes. And then it's like, oh, so that's kind of what that was about. And if you want to join, I'll put the Patreon link in here. I mean, no pressure. It's just like if I don't get 1,000 patrons here pretty soon, I'll have to just get a job as like a middle school English teacher, and you'll never hear from me again. So it's up to you guys. See you next time.